Good evening, folks. And it looks like Rian Johnson's back in the news talking about his Knives Out movie coming out for TIFF next month. That's September the 5th, from September 15th. There's a bit of advertisement downtown. It's getting kind of busy. It's always a fun time, especially during the summer. So he's doing the interviews and God knows what other things. And he's talking about movie making, because that's what you do. And he's talking about his new trilogy. And it's independent or disconnected from the Skywalker saga. So he says, I think that the fun and challenging part of it is to dive in, figure out what's exciting, and then figure out what it's going to be. Okay, it's kind of a blind way of approaching your task, but fine, nothing wrong with that. We're doing something that steps beyond the legacy characters. Well, I would hope so. I mean, that's kind of the point. You want to do your own thing. That's what writers have been doing in the EU since they saw the original films in the 70s and 80s. What does that look like? To me, the blue sky element of it is what was most striking about it. That doesn't tell me anything aside from he has a very innocent idea of what he's doing. I don't know what's going to happen to my brain. I know the way that I'm coming at it, and what's fun about it is for everyone in George Lucas's films is figuring out what's the next step. Okay, so obviously he can't talk much, or else he wouldn't have said a sentence like this. He's obviously behind some NDAs, and he doesn't want to reveal a thing at this point. He's a long way ahead, or a long way away from probably even figuring out what he's doing. While I'm talking about it, it really makes you think and figure out what the essence of Star Wars is for me. And what that will look like moving forward. This is the sentence that really throws me off, because this is a guy who's already made a Star Wars film. And he took the lore and he pretty much neglected it and did whatever the hell he wanted. He screwed up the Force in several ways. He screwed up lightspeed ramming in several ways. And that could be partially as a result of what J.J. Abrams started. But subverting everything we expect is not the proper way to make a Star Wars film. You could say it is a good way of starting a murder mystery, because you technically have to subvert everyone's expectations. You're presenting a series of plots or disconnected storylines that can become a actual plot. So maybe that's where his strength lies, and that's why he's sort of thinking philosophically about Star Wars here, because he's already made a murder mystery story or movie. But to say this is just strange, because he's made these films. He's been butchered online by people telling him what Star Wars is and what he thinks it should have been, or what people think it should have been. It's a very strange thing. Can you imagine someone like Drew Karpyshyn saying, it's really exciting for me to write about Darth Bane, and figuring out what's exciting to me with Star Wars, and then figure out what I'm going to write? It's like, you don't know what's exciting about Star Wars? Well, let's see. There's guys with lightsabers fighting each other. There's this mystical force in the universe that connects all things that you could use for good or evil, and it has various impacting physical realities. Then you got a whole bunch of starships smashing into each other and shooting each other in space. You have this thing called the Death Star, which blows up planets. Or in JJ World, the Super Death Star that blows up all kinds of planets. That's exciting. That's pretty basic stuff. Now, the typical stuff of character dramas and what have you, that's what you do in stories. You sort of allow characters to be themselves. So this is strange. This is something that I would not hear from a writer. For example, think of Harlan Ellison when he was asked to write an episode of Star Trek. He wrote The City on the Edge of Forever, which is the most famous, if not well-received, Star Trek episode ever, I believe, from the old series, or the original series. It actually involves time travel, which is very uncommon for a popular episode of anything, because time travel is complicated, but he kept it simple, as you should. Can you imagine Harlan Ellison ever saying something like this? I mean, Harlan Ellison was a son of a bitch, and egotistical to boot, and he was proud of being a writer, not a science fiction writer. So for someone who's already made a movie, who is a writer-director, to say these lines, it really makes you think and figure out what the essence of Star Wars is for me. If you don't know what the essence of a franchise, the most popular movie franchise in the world, you probably should not be writing and directing it. It's not a hard list to make. There's lightsaber battles, there's spaceship battles, there's melodrama, there's the mystical side of the Force, and there's the connectivity between the main characters and the audience and how you relate to them. The White Knight and the Black Knight in space. Little smidgen of mysticism, a whole lot of heart, lots of detail, lots of what ifs. What if we could do this in space, as any science fiction or sci-fi story involves. That's it. If you want to focus on, let's say, Drew Karpyshyn's story of Darth Bane and the Rule of Two and all these other interesting concepts of how Sith behave and how the Jedi behave, how they have families, how they raise their young, how Jedi are grown, like all these wonderful details which have been done in the EU. Then you know what, Ryan? Maybe all you had to do was just read some EU books. And during this interview, you say, you know what? I read some really great books of the EU. I was greatly inspired. He name drops an author. Boom. He's so invested in this story. I was expecting something like, hey, you know what? I love this book. This really got me inspired. I'm thinking of something like that, but way, way different. And you're like, whoa, Rian Johnson read a book? He actually enjoys Star Wars, or he's actually researching. That would prove to us that he knows what he's doing, or at least starting to. And maybe that's a red herring, maybe he's just throwing us off, but at least it will prove to us, the audience, that this guy has done some basic homework, and that an average fan who's a fan of the EU or the fan of the comics or what have you can do a better job. He has not proven to me with this sentence, and of course The Last Jedi, that he knew what he was doing. So, should he be egotistical? You're damn right he should be egotistical. He should be making movies for himself. But if you're within a franchise, you have to know who you're making your movies for. You see, you have to do both. You have to do it for yourself, and you have to give it to your audience. And you have to know your demographic. You can't just make stuff up because he doesn't know what the essence of Star Wars is, and that's just wrong. That's the wrong response, buddy. Anyway, maybe I'm reading too much into this. I probably am. I hope his movie does well. I hope all his movies do well, because we all want what's best for Star Wars. And, of course, we want movies to be awesome. But something tells me this is not the right response he should have given. And I can only hope that December is going to be better in the hands of J.J. Abrams. Anywho, that's enough for me today. Thanks, guys, for listening. Have yourself a great evening.